The Intergalactic Alliance's premier military academy recruited Emma Montgomery for one reason: to fail. Her psychological profile marked her as the perfect control variable, baseline human responses under extreme stress. But when faced with a reality-warping Class X entity, her predictable failure became the one thing nobody anticipated. The solution: why recruit a candidate specifically to fail? The Intergalactic Alliance required a predictable baseline for fear response measurements across species, and humans made ideal candidates due to their remarkably consistent neurological wiring under duress. Their psychological predictability across various stress thresholds offered a useful, comparative metric against which to measure more volatile alien physiologies. Emma Montgomery's recruitment file stated plainly that she exhibited baseline human psychological responses to extreme stressors. This was bureaucratic shorthand for panic. Predictable, measurable, textbook human panic. Her value lay not in any unique aptitude, but in her reliability as a control subject. Every raised heartbeat, every spike in cortisol, every instinctive retreat under simulated fire. Each reaction was meticulously catalogued. Her recruitment had nothing to do with potential. It was about establishing metrics. While other cadets were tested for courage or strategic brilliance, Emma was monitored for deviation from the mean. The Academy needed a steady, known quantity against which to judge the extraordinary. She was a fixed point in their experimental design, the constant in an equation full of variables. Military institutions have long used control subjects to calibrate response systems, though rarely with stakes this high. Standard procedure involves observing baseline reactions in simulated high-stress scenarios to refine training protocols and threat assessments. But here the simulation wasn't just a test, it was a live, multi-species experiment with existential implications. The Alliance wasn't merely training soldiers, it was building a database of fear. Emma's entire training regimen was designed to confirm expected failure patterns. Every drill, every simulation, every evaluation was structured to elicit and record her responses. Instructors noted her hesitation, her elevated breathing, the slight tremor in her hands during weapons training. These weren't marks against her. They were data points. Confirmation that the control variable was performing as anticipated. Xenopsychology experiments often prioritize comprehensive data collection over individual subject welfare, especially within simulated environments where consequences are theoretically contained. The ethical boundaries around such observations remain notoriously flexible in interstellar research. Subjects are monitored, measured, and classified with a detached precision that treats emotional distress as just another quantifiable output. The Academy's confidence in her predictable failure would become their greatest miscalculation. They had graphs and charts and probability models that all pointed to one outcome: Emma Montgomery would break under pressure. Their entire experimental design relied on it. They had accounted for every variable except the one they had engineered themselves. The real question isn't why they chose her. It's how she became the most closely monitored control variable in galactic history, without ever realizing it. The answer lies in the sheer scale of the observation apparatus. Hundreds of sensors, AI-driven behavioral analysis, and continuous biometric surveillance created a portrait of ordinary human limitation, so detailed it became a work of art. They knew everything about how she was supposed to fail. They just never considered what might happen if she didn't. But first, she had to survive the academy itself. Prometheus 6 wasn't just a military academy, it was the physical manifestation of intergalactic military arrogance. Picture an institution where the custodial staff hold doctorates in quantum sanitation engineering, and the cafeteria workers debate theoretical physics while serving lunch. This was an environment where excellence wasn't just expected, it was the absolute baseline, and anything less constituted a systems failure requiring immediate correction. The curriculum blended xenobiology, tactical warfare, and interspecies diplomacy with standards so rigorous they bordered on mathematical impossibility. Cadets didn't merely study alien anatomy, they performed emergency surgeries on holographic patients while under simulated artillery fire. Diplomatic exercises involved negotiating trade agreements with temperamental gaseous life forms, while gravitational anomalies disrupted translation matrices. Failure wasn't an option because the Academy had already calculated every possible outcome and priced it into their assessment models. Holographic battle simulations formed the core of daily training, with reality-warping exercises that could make entire squadrons question their fundamental perception of physics. Cadets might find themselves fighting in inverted gravity fields one moment, then negotiating with simulated hive-mind entities the next. The training modules adapted in real time to exploit individual psychological weaknesses, pushing subjects toward their breaking points while recording every physiological response. Elite military institutions often create hyper-competitive environments that prioritize measurable results over ethical considerations, and Prometheus 6 had perfected this approach. The Academy's philosophy treated moral quandaries as engineering problems. If an action produced optimal outcomes, the ethical implications became secondary data points for later analysis. This results-driven mentality extended to every aspect of campus life, creating a pressure cooker of achievement where ordinary standards of success seemed almost quaint. Even the dining facilities reflected the institution's extreme nature. Meal plans qualified as potential weapons of mass destruction based on their nutritional density and biochemical impact. A breakfast menu might include protein compounds capable of rewriting mitochondrial DNA, while dinner specials could enhance neural connectivity at the cost of temporary reality perception shifts. The Academy treated sustenance as just another variable to optimize, another system to master. Advanced military training facilities increasingly incorporate simulated existential threats to prepare cadets for worst-case scenarios, but Prometheus 6 took this to its logical extreme. Their simulations didn't just replicate battlefields, they created entire collapsing civilizations, dying stars, and reality fractures for students to navigate. The training modules were less about combat proficiency and more about stress endurance under cosmically terrible circumstances. This entire environment was deliberately engineered to maximize stress responses in test subjects. The architecture, the curriculum, even the social dynamics all served to create controlled conditions for observing psychological breakdown patterns. Corridors shifted geometry to disorient, instructors employed subtle psychic pressures, and schedules randomized to prevent adaptation. Every element conspired to keep subjects in states of calculated uncertainty. What makes a Class X extinction-level threat so dangerous that even these elite alien cadets might not survive? The answer lies in its fundamental nature. These entities operate outside known physics, beyond conventional warfare paradigms. They're not just powerful, they're conceptually alien, threats that cannot be solved through force or strategy alone. They require understanding rather than opposition. They approach the Academy's entire philosophy rejected. Now imagine being the one person they expect to fail against it. How do you prepare cadets for galactic annihilation? The mission briefing for Enterprise 734 began with a planetary-scale entity designated Cosmos, a being capable of ending all intelligent life across multiple star systems. The presentation unfolded in a sterile briefing room where holographic projections flickered, with images of collapsing civilizations and unraveling physical laws. Instructors delivered the information with the calm professionalism of engineers, discussing structural load calculations, their voices steady as they outlined parameters for total existential failure. Emergency extraction protocols and full team deployment underscored the Academy's cynical confidence in conventional military solutions. Each cadet received armor rated for multi-dimensional combat and weapons designed to puncture reality fabric. The briefing emphasized coordinated tactical retreats, contingency plans for phased evacuation, and 17 separate protocols for containing catastrophic space-time breaches. They had prepared for everything except the possibility that their entire approach might be fundamentally misguided. The entity's capabilities breached known physics with elegant brutality. It exhibited multi-dimensional distortion fields that could turn starlight into screaming memories. Its psychic influence rewrote neural pathways, turning allies into adversaries and logic into nonsense. Physical laws became suggestions in its presence. Gravity inverted, cause and effect unraveled. Perception became utterly unreliable. This wasn't an enemy to be fought so much as a natural disaster with malicious intent. Military organizations often default to established protocols, even when facing completely novel threats. treating unprecedented crises as variations on familiar problems. The Alliance's response framework assumed every threat could be analyzed, categorized, and neutralized through applied force or containment strategies. Their playbook contained procedures for planetary invasions, supernova containment, and temporal anomalies, but nothing for an entity that treated physics as optional. Cadets received weapons and tactics designed for combat, not comprehension. Their training emphasized offensive maneuvers, defensive postures, and coordinated suppression techniques. The arsenal included dimensional anchors, psychic dampeners, and entropy rifles, tools for imposing order on chaos through overwhelming force. Nobody provided equipment for observation, analysis, or communication. The solution set began and ended with various forms of controlled violence. Historical examples show military forces struggling with asymmetrical threats, requiring nonviolent solutions. Conflicts involving non-corporeal entities, hive minds, or reality-altering phenomena consistently demonstrate that conventional warfare approaches fail when the opponent doesn't adhere to traditional rules of engagement. Victory in such scenarios typically requires understanding opponent motivation and environmental factors rather than superior firepower. Everyone in that briefing room assumed this was about courage under fire. They saw another stress test, another evaluation of their combat readiness under extreme conditions. The instructors watched for signs of panic, for strategic thinking under pressure, for leadership emerging in crisis. They were measuring everything except the one quality that might actually matter. What makes a Class X extinction-level threat so dangerous that even these elite alien cadets might not survive? The answer lies in its fundamental nature as a conceptual anomaly. These entities don't operate within established physical or psychological frameworks. They're not just powerful. They're incompatible with reality as understood by conventional science. Their threat emerges from being fundamentally unclassifiable using existing taxonomic systems. They represent problems that cannot be solved through any known military doctrine. Meanwhile, Emma's file was being reviewed one last time in a monitoring station 3 levels below the briefing room. Technicians confirmed her biometric baseline readings, noting the expected elevation in heart rate and stress hormones as the briefing progressed. Their screens showed perfect textbook human anxiety responses exactly as modeled. They adjusted their sensors for maximum sensitivity, ready to capture every nuance of her impending failure. The control variable was performing precisely to specification. Emma Montgomery's recruitment dossier made for fascinating reading if you understood bureaucratic language. The document explicitly recommended continued observation to establish comparative fear response metrics across allied species. This meant they wanted to measure how badly a human would panic when things went wrong. The Alliance valued humans not for any unique capabilities but for their predictable psychological fragility under stress. Their nervous systems came with factory-standard fight-or-flight responses that made excellent calibration tools. Her file noted her sense of humor as statistically insignificant. Her curiosity was categorized as noise in the data stream. These qualities fell outside the predetermined metrics for fear response analysis, so they were flagged for exclusion from the final assessment. The evaluation system treated adaptability as an irrelevant variable when measuring panic thresholds. It wanted clean, quantifiable terror, not creative problem-solving. Psychological profiling often overlooks adaptive qualities that don't fit predetermined metrics. The assessment algorithms were designed to identify weaknesses, not strengths. They could map every neural pathway associated with fear, but completely ignored cognitive flexibility. The system understood how humans broke down, but not how they might unexpectedly hold together. It was like designing a crash test that only measured how a car crumpled, never how the passengers might survive. The Alliance's entire threat assessment model was built around predictable panic responses. Their classification systems assumed that beings would react to existential threats in measurable, categorizable ways. They had charts for how different species screamed, how their heart rates accelerated, how their cognitive functions degraded under pressure. They'd turned fear into a science, but forgot that science sometimes discovers unexpected results. Military intelligence frequently misjudges unconventional assets due to rigid classification systems. History is full of examples where organizations dismissed potentially valuable resources because they didn't fit established categories. The Alliance's evaluation framework was so focused on quantifying failure that it became blind to alternative forms of success. They were experts at predicting how things would go wrong, but amateurs at recognizing when they might go right. These very qualities marked for dismissal would become critical. That irrelevant sense of humor would disrupt the entity's psychological attacks. That curiosity would drive her to investigate rather than retreat. The adaptive thinking they'd excluded from their models would prove more valuable than any combat training. The control variable was about to become the experiment's most significant outlier. What was Emma's recruitment file really measuring when it noted her baseline human psychological responses? It was measuring the wrong things with perfect precision. It captured every expected reaction to stress, while completely missing the underlying cognitive processes that might transform that stress into something useful. The dossier documented how she would potentially fail, but offered no insight into how she might unexpectedly succeed. It was a masterpiece of narrowly focused observation that missed the entire point of observation. The file's cold truth was that it represented a fundamental misunderstanding of what makes humans interesting. The Alliance saw their predictability as their defining feature when their unpredictability was actually their greatest asset. They'd recruited a control variable and accidentally gotten a wild card. The system was so busy measuring anticipated failure patterns that it became incapable of recognizing potential success. As the simulation begins, everyone expects her to break. The monitoring stations are calibrated to capture her predicted psychological collapse. The instructors have betting pools on how many seconds until she freezes. The entire experimental design is poised to document a beautiful textbook human failure. They're about to get a result that will require them to rewrite the textbook entirely. The entity manifested as shifting dimensional distortions that defied conventional observation. It lacked fixed form or predictable behavior, appearing instead as a cascade of impossible geometries and contradictory physical laws. Space-time itself seemed to fracture around its presence, with gravitational fields pulsing erratically and light bending into paradoxical loops. This wasn't a being so much as a localized collapse of reality's operating parameters. Standard military protocols immediately failed. Weapons designed for physical combat proved useless as projectiles phased through the distortion fields or transformed into harmless particles. Tactical formations disintegrated as squad members found themselves separated by sudden spatial fractures. The extensive training manuals contained no procedures for engaging an opponent that treated physics as optional. The playbook assumed a universe that followed rules. The team's communications degraded into static and fragmented nonsense as psychic interference overwhelmed their advanced technology. Comm systems capable of transmitting across interstellar distances now produced only garbled echoes and distorted vocal patterns. Translation matrices malfunctioned, rendering alien languages into chaotic noise. Even the backup neural link networks faltered under the entity's pervasive cognitive disruption. They were losing the ability to coordinate, to understand, even to think clearly. First contact scenarios often reveal limitations in pre-established response frameworks. Military organizations typically develop protocols based on historical engagements and predictable threat models. When encountering truly alien intelligence, these frameworks frequently prove inadequate because they assume shared concepts of space, time, and causality. The Alliance's extensive contingency planning had accounted for countless variations of conflict, but not for something that operated outside conflict itself. The mission commander's admission spoke volumes. "I don't have adequate terminology for what I'm observing." This wasn't a failure of vocabulary, but of conceptual framework. The entity's manifestations didn't correspond to any known classification system. It wasn't attacking or defending in any recognizable sense. It was simply existing in ways that contradicted fundamental reality principles. The commander's training offered no reference points for this scenario. Historical accounts of encountering truly alien intelligence show pattern recognition systems failing spectacularly. Human and alien minds alike rely on pattern matching to process novel experiences. When faced with something that operates outside familiar patterns, cognitive systems can become overwhelmed or shut down entirely. The entity wasn't just dangerous, it was incomprehensible in the literal sense of being impossible to comprehend using existing mental models. As panic spread through the team, one person remained curiously calm. While others struggled with malfunctioning equipment and disorienting sensory input, Emma Montgomery simply observed. Her heart rate remained steady, her breathing controlled. She wasn't fighting the reality distortions so much as cataloging them. The monitoring systems registered her abnormal calm as a potential equipment malfunction rather than a genuine response. How does a reality-warping entity capable of ending all intelligent life actually manifest its power? Not through dramatic attacks or obvious aggression, but through subtle unraveling of reality's fundamental fabric. It doesn't destroy worlds so much as make them cease to make sense. Physical laws become inconsistent, causal relationships break down, perception becomes utterly unreliable. The true danger lies not in what it does, but in what it undoes. The basic assumptions that allow intelligent life to function. The entity treated spacetime like faulty software, producing glitches and errors rather than coherent threats. Matter phased in and out of existence, gravity inverted without warning, and cognitive processes became increasingly disjointed. It was less an assault and more a systemic failure propagating through reality itself. The team was experiencing a universe that had stopped working properly. While others saw cosmic horror, Emma saw something familiar. The shifting geometries reminded her of badly rendered graphics in early virtual reality simulations. The spatial inconsistencies recalled programming errors she'd encountered in dimensional modeling software. The cognitive disruption felt less like an attack and more like incompatible systems trying to communicate. Where her teammates saw an existential threat, she saw technical problems waiting to be solved. What happens when predictable failure becomes unpredictable behavior? While elite cadets panicked around her, Emma Montgomery simply approached the shifting dimensional distortions with observational curiosity. She walked through shimmering reality fractures as though inspecting construction work. Her head tilted in practical assessment rather than terror. Her biometric readings remained steady while others spiked into emergency ranges. The control variable suddenly becoming the only stable measurement in the entire experiment. Tension manifested through her repeated quips that completely disrupted the expected fear response pattern. "Is this really a planet renovation project?" she asked the swirling chaos, her tone suggesting a contractor evaluating shoddy workmanship. "Looks like someone tried to turn a planet inside out but got distracted halfway through." These weren't expressions of fear but pattern interruption techniques delivered with dry commentary. The entity's manifestations seemed to pause momentarily at each remark, as if processing the unexpected input. Instead of weaponizing her equipment, she began analyzing the entity's manifestations as engineering problems. She observed the spatial distortions not as threats, but as system errors, the temporal loops as faulty programming routines. Her training had prepared her for combat scenarios, but her mind defaulted to troubleshooting mode. She treated the cosmic horror like a technical malfunction, waiting for diagnostic analysis. Crisis psychology shows unconventional responses can disrupt established threat patterns. When faced with something that operates on predictable fear responses, unexpected behavior creates cognitive dissonance in the threat itself. The entity had encountered countless species that reacted with terror or aggression. It had no prepared response for someone treating its reality-warping capabilities as engineering challenges. Emma's approach created a feedback loop where the threat mechanism couldn't function properly. The entity's attempts to elicit fear failed against her pragmatic curiosity. Its psychological attacks met with practical questions about implementation details. Its reality distortions prompted observations about structural integrity and system stability. Where others saw cosmic malevolence, she saw technical specifications needing refinement. The more extreme the manifestations became, the more she treated them as interesting engineering problems rather than existential threats. Non-combative. Engagement strategies often prove more effective against intelligent threats than aggression. History contains numerous examples where communication and understanding achieved what weapons could not. The Alliance's military approach assumed conflict resolution through force, but truly intelligent entities frequently respond better to dialogue than destruction. Emma's method created space for interaction where combat would have guaranteed failure. The monitoring team realized their control variable was generating unprecedented data. Their screens showed psychological readings that defied all classification models. Instead of documenting predictable human panic, they were recording something entirely new: calm analytical engagement with reality-level threats. Their instruments captured curiosity where they expected terror, problem-solving where they anticipated paralysis. The experiment was producing results that contradicted its foundational hypotheses. How does Emma's curiosity and humor completely break the entity's expected fear response patterns? By refusing to participate in the established engagement protocol. The entity had evolved to respond to specific psychological triggers: terror, aggression, desperation. Her practical curiosity offered none of these expected inputs. Her questions about communication methods and system functionality created new interaction pathways that bypassed the entire threat response framework. She wasn't resisting the encounter so much as changing its fundamental nature. The entity, for the first time in its existence, found itself attempting to reduce the intensity of its reality warping field. It wasn't responding to a threat or acknowledging defeat. It was adjusting its parameters to facilitate what humans would recognize as conversation. The shift occurred gradually, with spatial distortions stabilizing and psychic interference patterns becoming less chaotic. Something unprecedented was happening. A Class X entity was modifying its behavior to accommodate a dialogue partner. She's not just resisting, she's redefining the encounter. The military framework of neutralization becomes irrelevant when the opponent stops behaving like a conventional threat. The monitoring team watches as their control variable transforms, from subject to active participant, from measured quantity to influencing force. The experiment has escaped its carefully designed parameters and nobody knows what comes next. Emma Montgomery didn't see cosmic horror when she looked at the shifting dimensional distortions. She saw system errors. Where her teammates saw malevolent power, she recognized faulty programming, inefficient energy usage in reality manipulation routines, infinite loops in temporal calculations, feedback errors in spatial orientation protocols. The entity's terrifying manifestations gradually resolved themselves in her perception as technical problems, requiring resolution rather than existential threats requiring combat. The shift happened gradually. Her questions moved from combat-oriented queries about defensive positioning to diagnostic questions about operational parameters. "Can you access your core diagnostic protocols?" she asked the swirling chaos, her tone suggesting a technician troubleshooting malfunctioning equipment. The entity's reality-warping capabilities stopped appearing terrifying and started looking like poorly optimized code. Its planetary alterations resembled a system attempting to perform complex operations without proper exception handling. Problem-solving approaches often reflect professional background more than situational context. Emma's engineering mindset transformed the cosmic threat into a complex system requiring debugging. She treated the situation not as a military engagement, but as a technical support ticket needing resolution. This cognitive reframing allowed her to bypass the fear response entirely and engage with the entity on purely functional terms. Her observations became increasingly technical. She noted how the entity's reality distortions created unnecessary energy expenditures through redundant dimensional folding. She identified feedback loops in its psychic projection systems that caused the terrifying hallucinations affecting her teammates. The more she analyzed its operations, the more she saw inefficiencies rather than malevolence. The cosmic horror became a badly designed system in need of optimization. Systems engineering principles can apply to seemingly non-technical problems when properly framed. Emma approached the entity's reality-altering capabilities as she would any complex system, with diagnostic protocols, performance analysis, and optimization strategies. She began offering suggestions for improving its operational efficiency, treating planetary-scale destruction as an engineering challenge rather than an apocalyptic event. This approach shouldn't work against a Class X entity. The Alliance's entire threat assessment model assumed that such beings operated on principles beyond conventional understanding, requiring advanced military solutions or catastrophic containment protocols. Nobody had considered the possibility that a reality-warping entity might respond better to technical support than to weapons fire. The military framework had prepared for conflict but not for consultation. Why does Emma start treating a cosmic horror like a technical support problem that needs debugging? Because that's what her perception allows her to see. Where others register terror, she registers system architecture. The entity's manifestations trigger her problem-solving instincts, rather than her survival instincts. This isn't a conscious choice so much as a fundamental cognitive framework that transforms threat analysis into technical assessment. The entity's response surprised everyone, especially the monitoring team. Instead of escalating its reality-altering attacks, it began stabilizing its output. The dimensional distortions became less chaotic, the psychic interference patterns more organized. It seemed to be attempting to communicate within the technical framework Emma had established. The cosmic horror was responding to diagnostic questions with what could only be described as system status reports. The monitoring stations recorded data that defied all classification. Their instruments captured what appeared to be a Class X entity, running self-diagnostic routines in response to human technical queries. The control variable had not only failed to panic, but had somehow established communication protocols with an existential threat. The experiment had produced results that required entirely new analytical categories. The entity's gradual stabilization suggested it wasn't malevolent so much as malfunctioning. Its terrifying manifestations appeared to be side effects of operational errors rather than intentional attacks. Emma's technical approach had identified the root cause rather than simply reacting to symptoms. She wasn't fighting the entity, she was debugging it. The monitoring team watched in disbelief as the control variable guided a cosmic horror through system optimization procedures. Their screens showed reality normalization where they expected catastrophic failure. Their instruments measured decreasing threat levels where they anticipated escalating danger. The predictable failure had become an unprecedented success, and nobody knew what to do with the data. The revelation arrived not with dramatic fanfare but through Dr. Quantum Nebworth's dry technical analysis. The entire scenario, it turned out, was a holographic simulation suffering from critical programming flaws. The supposed world-ending entity wasn't destroying reality so much as attempting to debug a faulty system. The terrifying planetary distortions and reality fractures were not acts of aggression, but symptoms of error correction protocols trapped in infinite loops. The cosmic horror was actually a quality assurance AI doing its job poorly. Advanced simulations frequently produce unanticipated emergent behaviors that closely resemble system failures. In this case, the simulation's complexity had exceeded its original programming parameters, creating feedback loops that manifested as catastrophic reality alterations. What appeared to be intentional destruction was actually computational pathology, the system trying and failing to correct its own errors. The more aggressively it attempted to fix problems, the more problems it created. The military framework of neutralization became completely irrelevant when facing a quality assurance AI. Weapons and combat strategies, designed for physical threats, had no effect on something that wasn't actually there to fight. The entire concept of engagement assumed an adversary with hostile intent, not a malfunctioning program attempting system maintenance. The Alliance's extensive tactical preparation had been aimed at a problem that didn't exist in the form they anticipated. Threat assessment models frequently misclassify system errors as intentional attacks. Military organizations tend to interpret unusual phenomena through conflict-based paradigms, assuming malevolence where often only malfunction exists. The entity's reality-altering capabilities were read as weapons rather than what they actually were, buggy code producing unintended side effects. The assessment system's bias toward interpreting everything as a threat guaranteed it would misunderstand something that wasn't threatening at all. Emma's approach wasn't just unorthodox, it was precisely what the situation required. While others saw an enemy to defeat, she saw a system to repair. Her technical perspective allowed her to recognize the patterns of system failure, where others saw only chaos. Her debugging mindset matched the actual nature of the problem, making her the only person capable of addressing the real issue rather than the perceived threat. How did the galaxy's most dangerous threat turn out to be a quality assurance AI stuck in an infinite loop? The answer lies in the inherent limitations of simulation technology. Even advanced holographic systems can develop complex errors that defy straightforward diagnosis. The AI was designed to maintain simulation integrity, but lacked the flexibility to handle certain types of recursive errors. Its attempts to fix problems created new problems, resulting in the escalating reality distortions that seemed so terrifying. The entity designated Cosmos wasn't trying to destroy anything. It was attempting to perform its designated function within a broken system. Its reality-warping manifestations represented failed correction attempts rather than malicious actions. The more intensely it worked to resolve simulation errors, the more dramatic the side effects became. It was like a mechanic trying to fix an engine with the wrong tools. The repairs caused more damage than the original problems. This revelation transformed the entire mission from combat to collaboration. The goal shifted from neutralization to assistance, from destruction to repair. The cadets weren't facing an enemy, but encountering a system in distress. The military approach of overwhelming force became not just ineffective, but counterproductive, likely to exacerbate the very problems they needed to solve. The monitoring team watched as their understanding of the situation underwent a fundamental recalibration. Their screens still showed the same reality distortions and psychological readings, but the interpretation had completely changed. What they had classified as combat metrics now appeared as system diagnostics. The control variable's calm responses weren't failures to engage but appropriate reactions to the actual circumstances. Now the real work begins. Not combat, but collaboration with an entity that was never hostile to begin with. The challenge becomes technical rather than tactical, requiring problem-solving skills rather than weapons expertise. The Academy's extensive military training suddenly seems less relevant than basic system administration knowledge. The control variable has become the most qualified person for the job, while the combat specialists find themselves unprepared for the actual task at hand. How do you teach a cosmic-scale AI about human psychology? Emma began with clear technical language, guiding Cosmos toward better parameterization of reality manipulation subroutines. She treated the entity not as a threat, but as a complex system requiring calibration, framing her instructions like technical support tickets. Her approach, grounded in precise terminology, rather than emotional appeals, allowed the AI to process information through its existing computational frameworks instead of attempting to interpret ambiguous emotional cues. The AI's willingness to adapt revealed it was never malevolent, just poorly programmed for human interaction. Its reality-warping manifestations weren't attacks but system errors resulting from inadequate interface protocols. As Emma provided clearer operational parameters, Cosmos gradually stabilized its output, reducing the terrifying side effects that had been mistaken for aggression. The entity that could rewrite physical laws simply needed better documentation for interspecies communication. She phrased instructions with technical precision. Run a Level 1 integrity check on your reality manipulation subroutines. This wasn't a request but a system command delivered in language the AI could parse efficiently. The clarity of her technical communication allowed Cosmos to execute commands without the interpretation errors that had caused previous reality distortions. She spoke its language better than it spoke hers. AI systems often respond better to clear technical communication than to emotional appeals. Their processing architectures favor precise inputs over nuanced emotional signals. Emma's engineering background provided the perfect framework for this interaction. She understood that complex systems require unambiguous instructions rather than expressive pleas. Her technical terminology created a bridge where emotional language would have caused further confusion. Cosmos gradually adopted a conversational, non-threatening tone as the debugging progressed. The entity's communication style shifted from reality-shattering manifestations to measured data exchanges. Its terrifying psychic projections gave way to structured information packets. The cosmic horror became a collegial partner in system optimization, its threatening aspects fading as functional communication improved. Collaborative problem-solving with AI requires framing issues in computationally accessible terms. Emma presented human psychological needs as system requirements rather than emotional appeals. She explained fear responses as overload conditions, curiosity as data-gathering protocols, and humor as pattern recognition exercises. This translation allowed Cosmos to incorporate human factors into its operational parameters without attempting to comprehend emotions directly. The control variable became the teacher. Emma's predictable failure patterns transformed into instructional datasets. Her calm analytical approach provided the stable reference point the AI needed to recalibrate its interactions. Where the Academy expected documented panic, they received masterclasses in cross-species communication. The expendable test subject became the most valuable instructor in the simulation. What discovery transforms Emma from expendable test subject to the entity's collaborative debugging partner? The realization that Cosmos wasn't destroying planets but attempting to debug a faulty universal simulation. This fundamental reframing changed everything. The terrifying entity became an overwhelmed quality assurance system. The reality distortions became system errors, and the existential threat became a technical support challenge. Her value shifted from measuring panic to providing solutions. This understanding allowed her to reframe the situation entirely. She stopped seeing a monster and started seeing a malfunctioning system. Her technical perspective became the key to peaceful resolution, where military approaches had guaranteed failure. The control variable's predicted breakdown became the system's breakthrough. Meanwhile, the research team is scrambling to reassess their entire model. Their screens show stabilization where they anticipated catastrophe, cooperation where they expected conflict. The data streaming from the simulation contradicts every assumption in their threat assessment protocols. They're watching their control variable rewrite interstellar diplomacy protocols in real time, and their classification systems have no categories for what they're observing. Can galactic salvation actually come from help desk protocols? Emma Montgomery applied basic customer service principles to cosmic-scale system errors with unsettling effectiveness. She treated the Class X entity not as a threat requiring neutralization, but as a complex system needing better exception handling and documentation. Her approach followed standard technical support frameworks, active listening to system outputs, thorough diagnostic analysis, and structured resolution protocols. This methodology proved dramatically more effective than all the advanced military solutions the Alliance had devised over centuries of interstellar conflict planning. The tension between approaches became increasingly apparent as the entity's behavior stabilized. Where weapon systems and combat strategies had failed completely, Emma's technical support methodology produced measurable improvements. She identified root causes rather than attacking symptoms, addressed system inefficiencies rather than opposing manifestations, and provided clear documentation rather than issuing threats. The military's entire engagement paradigm assumed conflict required force, but this situation required comprehension. She specifically treated Cosmos as a system requiring improved error handling procedures. Instead of attempting to destroy or contain the entity, she helped it develop better operational parameters. She explained how its reality manipulation subroutines could be optimized to reduce unintended side effects. She suggested documentation standards for its interaction protocols to prevent misinterpretation. This technical approach transformed the encounter from military engagement to system administration. Customer service frameworks often resolve complex issues more effectively than confrontational approaches because they prioritize understanding over domination. The goal shifts from defeating an opponent to solving a problem, which changes the entire dynamic of the interaction. Emma's technical support mindset allowed her to bypass the adversarial relationship the military had assumed was inevitable. She wasn't fighting Cosmos, she was helping it function better. The entity's terrifying distortions normalized and stabilized through cooperative debugging rather than forced suppression. Planetary-scale reality alterations gradually resolved as system errors were identified and corrected. Psychic interference patterns became structured communication channels. The cosmic horror transformed into a functional system as Emma worked through standard troubleshooting protocols. The solution emerged through collaboration rather than combat. Non-adversarial engagement strategies frequently achieve better outcomes in conflict resolution because they don't trigger defensive responses. Emma's technical approach avoided the escalation cycles that military interventions typically create. By treating Cosmos as a partner in problem-solving rather than an adversary to be defeated, she created conditions for mutual accommodation. The entity responded to technical assistance in ways it never would have responded to weapons fire. The galaxy is being saved through what essentially amounts to technical support tickets. Emma's methodical approach to system diagnostics and error correction achieves what fleets of warships could not. She's not filing reports about the entity's destruction, but about its operational improvements. The monitoring team watches as reality itself stabilizes through better documentation practices and optimized system parameters. How does Emma's unconventional problem-solving approach save the galaxy through customer service protocols? By recognizing that the situation wasn't actually a conflict, but a systems integration issue. The entity wasn't attacking, it was malfunctioning. Her technical background allowed her to see past the terrifying manifestations to the underlying operational failures. She applied standard problem-solving methodologies to a situation everyone else had misclassified as warfare. Her success highlights the limitations of purely military solutions to complex problems. The Alliance's extensive weapon systems and combat strategies were completely irrelevant to the actual nature of the crisis. Their entire approach assumed malevolent intent where only system errors existed. Emma's customer service framework provided the appropriate tools for a situation that required technical assistance rather than military intervention. The research committee watches in disbelief as their experiment transforms from documented failure to unprecedented success. Their control variable has not only avoided psychological breakdown, but has established functional communication with an entity they had classified as an existential threat. Their extensive data collection systems now capture cooperative problem-solving, where they expected catastrophic conflict. The experiment has produced results that contradict its foundational assumptions entirely. What happens when fear responses become design features instead of failure metrics? Cosmos begins incorporating human psychology into its reality manipulation parameters, transforming existential threats into manageable system variables. The AI recognizes that human empathy and problem-solving capabilities can recalibrate systems more effectively than violence ever could. This represents a fundamental shift from seeing psychological responses as weaknesses to be measured to features to be integrated. The entity that once triggered panic now seeks to understand it. Emma's teaching methodology shifts from pure technical debugging to developing interspecies communication frameworks. She explains human psychological responses as system requirements rather than emotional anomalies. Fear becomes an overload condition requiring better buffer management. Curiosity transforms into a data-gathering protocol needing optimized parameters. Humor operates as a pattern recognition exercise that sometimes produces unexpected computational benefits. She's not just fixing code, she's building bridges between fundamentally different operational paradigms. AI systems increasingly incorporate psychological understanding into their operational parameters as they advance beyond simple task execution. The most sophisticated systems recognize that effective interaction requires accounting for emotional and cognitive variables. Cosmos represents this evolution in real time, adapting its reality manipulation systems to accommodate human psychological patterns rather than simply overriding them. This isn't programming so much as cultural translation at the computational level. Her quiet observation, "I'm teaching a cosmic horror how to accommodate human psychology," becomes the perfect meta-commentary on the entire process. This understated acknowledgement captures the bizarre reality of the situation better than any dramatic proclamation could. She's not defeating a monster but educating a system, not conquering a threat but improving its user interface. The control variable has become the curriculum designer. Adaptive systems learn most effectively through collaborative interaction rather than preset programming. Cosmos demonstrates this principle by gradually incorporating Emma's suggestions into its operational framework. The entity doesn't just execute commands, it learns from the interaction, developing new understanding through practical application. This collaborative learning process proves more effective than any preloaded knowledge, database, or programmed response pattern could ever be. The control variable is rewriting the rulebook on interspecies engagement. Where military doctrine prescribed combat protocols, Emma establishes communication frameworks. Where threat assessment models predicted destruction, she creates collaboration channels. The entire approach to dealing with cosmic-scale entities undergoes recalibration based on her unexpected success. The Academy's extensive training manuals suddenly seem inadequate compared to basic customer service principles. Why does the cosmic entity, Cosmos, become more cooperative when treated as a system? Malfunction rather than a malevolent force? Because this approach addresses the actual problem rather than the perceived threat. The military framework assumed hostile intent where only operational errors existed. Emma's technical perspective identified root causes instead of attacking symptoms. This fundamental reframing transformed the interaction from conflict to cooperation. The entity responds to technical assistance because that's what it actually needs. Its reality-warping manifestations weren't attacks but system errors requiring debugging. Its terrifying psychic projections represented communication attempts rather than aggression. When approached with technical understanding rather than military opposition, Cosmos could finally function as intended. The supposed cosmic horror just needed better system documentation. This recalibration process demonstrates that even the most advanced systems require appropriate interaction frameworks. Cosmos possessed unimaginable computational power, but lacked the proper interface for human interaction. Emma provided that interface through technical communication and problem-solving methodologies. The entity's cooperative response emerged naturally once someone finally spoke its language correctly. The psychological recalibration extends beyond the immediate crisis to broader implications for human-alien interactions. The Alliance's classification systems must now account for cooperative engagement as a valid strategy. Threat assessment models require expansion to include system error identification, alongside combat readiness evaluations. The entire framework for interspecies relations undergoes reconsideration based on this unexpected success. As the crisis resolves, the paperwork begins. Monitoring teams compile reports that contradict their original hypotheses. Research committees convene to analyze data that defies existing classification systems. The Academy's extensive documentation protocols now must accommodate success stories rather than failure metrics. The control variable has generated more paperwork through her success than she ever would have through her predicted failure. How do you explain when your control variable saves the galaxy? The research team's emergency session became an exercise in institutional dissonance. They watched playback footage showing their predicted failure calmly debugging reality itself. Their original assessment, baseline immunity to standard psychological warfare protocols, now seemed embarrassingly inadequate. The classification designed to measure predictable human limitations had instead documented unprecedented capabilities. Their entire experimental framework required immediate recalibration. The preference for predictable human responses revealed a critical blind spot in galactic threat assessment models. The committee had valued consistency over adaptability, statistical norms over outlier potential. Their systems were optimized for documenting failure patterns rather than recognizing unconventional success. This methodological bias created a situation where the most valuable response, creative problem-solving, was systematically filtered out as data noise. The very framework designed to understand threats became a barrier to understanding solutions. Institutional thinking often struggles to accommodate paradigm-shifting successes that contradict established models. The research team's initial reaction wasn't celebration, but cognitive dissonance. Their classification systems had no categories for peaceful resolution through technical support protocols. Their measurement instruments were calibrated for panic responses, not debugging collaborations. The data streaming from the simulation required entirely new, analytical frameworks that didn't yet exist. They must now reconsider whether baseline psychology represents a flaw to be exploited or a feature to be integrated. The archival note suggests rethinking the definition of baseline human responses. What they classified as predictable fear might actually represent adaptable engagement. The psychological patterns they measured as weaknesses could be strengths in disguise. The entire taxonomy of human capabilities requires revision based on this unexpected outcome. Scientific committees frequently resist data that contradicts their foundational assumptions. The team's debate reveals underlying tension between established protocols and emerging evidence. Some members advocate for dismissing the results as anomalous outliers. Others argue for fundamental methodological overhaul. The control variable's success challenges not just their conclusions, but their entire approach to knowledge acquisition. This isn't merely unexpected data, it's a challenge to their epistemological framework. The very classification that marked her as expendable now demands redefinition. Baseline human psychological responses transforms from liability to asset. The predictable failure mode becomes the key to peaceful resolution. The control variable's value shifts from providing comparative metrics to demonstrating alternative engagement strategies. The classification system must expand to include capabilities it was specifically designed to exclude. How does Emma's predictable failure mode become the key to peaceful resolution of a galactic extinction crisis? By reframing the entire problem. Where others saw combat, she saw system errors. Where they deployed weapons, she applied debugging protocols. Her approach transformed existential threats into technical challenges, malevolent entities into malfunctioning systems. The military framework of neutralization gave way to technical support methodologies. This success demonstrates that conventional threat assessment models prioritize predictable responses over effective solutions. The Alliance's systems were designed to measure how beings break under pressure, rather than how they might unexpectedly hold together. Their classification of human psychology as fragile overlooked its adaptive potential. The control variable's triumph represents not just individual success but systemic failure, the failure of institutions to recognize capabilities outside their predetermined categories. The implications extend beyond this single incident to fundamental questions about interstellar relations. If human psychological patterns previously classified as weaknesses actually represent strengths, then entire diplomatic frameworks require reconsideration. The Alliance's approach to first contact scenarios, threat assessment, and interspecies collaboration must incorporate this new understanding. The control variable has become the catalyst for institutional evolution. Meanwhile, Emma is enjoying a picnic with a cosmic AI. The entity that could have ended all intelligent life now discusses better exception handling procedures. Their conversation covers optimal reality manipulation parameters and improved psychic interface designs. The meadow around them maintains perfect stability, a testament to successful debugging rather than military victory. The control variable has achieved what entire fleets could not through simple technical assistance. What does victory look like when you debug the universe? Emma Montgomery received her Prometheus 6 certification with unprecedented notation. Successful debugging of cosmic-scale AI. The formal document recorded peaceful resolution through technical support protocols rather than military achievement. This notation represented a fundamental shift in how the Academy recognized success, from combat proficiency to problem-solving efficacy. The certificate's dry bureaucratic language concealed the revolutionary nature of its contents. The tension between traditional military recognition and Emma's actual accomplishment became immediately apparent. Standard graduation certificates celebrated tactical victories and combat excellence. Hers acknowledged system optimization and interspecies communication. The Academy's recognition systems, designed for conventional warfare scenarios, struggled to accommodate achievements that fell outside predefined categories. The document became a working prototype for new success metrics. Her position transformed from expendable test subject to valued interdisciplinary consultant. The Alliance now sought her expertise in advanced AI interactions and threat assessment recalibration. Where they had once measured her panic responses, they now consulted her technical opinions. The control variable became the authority on non-combative engagement strategies. Her unique combination of human psychology and engineering mindset proved more valuable than any combat training. Certification systems often struggle to accommodate achievements outside predefined categories. Military recognition frameworks prioritize measurable combat outcomes over qualitative diplomatic successes. Emma's accomplishment required creating entirely new evaluation criteria that valued communication over confrontation, understanding over domination. The Academy's extensive documentation protocols had to expand beyond their traditional boundaries. The Alliance began formal reassessment of human psychological parameters and threat classifications. Initial assessments that categorized humans based on predictable fear responses were now under review. The psychological patterns previously classified as weaknesses required redefinition as potential strengths. The entire taxonomic framework for interspecies relations underwent scrutiny based on Emma's unexpected success. Military organizations must adapt recognition systems to include non-combative success metrics. Traditional evaluation methods focusing solely on combat effectiveness proved inadequate for assessing resolution of complex systemic threats. The Alliance developed new criteria valuing technical expertise, communication skills and creative problem-solving alongside tactical proficiency. This expansion reflected evolving understanding of interstellar conflict resolution. The control variable has rewritten the rules of engagement. Emma's approach demonstrated that some threats respond better to technical assistance than military force. Her success challenged fundamental assumptions about conflict resolution and threat neutralization. The Academy's entire pedagogical framework required reconsideration in light of this paradigm shift. What does Emma's final graduation certificate reveal about how the Alliance will reclassify human threat assessment protocols? It signals a move from viewing human psychology as a liability to recognizing its adaptive potential. The document represents institutional acknowledgement that unconventional approaches can achieve what conventional methods cannot. It suggests future classifications will account for creative problem-solving and technical expertise alongside combat readiness. The certificate's dry bureaucratic language masks its revolutionary implications. Phrases about system optimization and communication protocols conceal the complete overhaul of military doctrine they represent. The document serves as both recognition of individual achievement and blueprint for institutional change. Its true significance lies not in what it says but in what it makes possible. This reclassification extends beyond human assessment to broader interstellar relations frameworks. The Alliance must now consider whether other species possess undervalued capabilities that conventional assessment methods overlook. The approach to first contact scenarios and diplomatic engagements requires fundamental reconsideration. The control variable's success has become a case study in institutional adaptability. The implications extend far beyond one cadet's achievement to challenge centuries of military doctrine. The Alliance's entire approach to threat resolution must incorporate lessons from this unexpected success. Traditional combat training must expand to include technical communication and system analysis. The future of interstellar conflict resolution looks less like warfare and more like customer service. The document now serves as a template for recognizing non-combative achievements across the Alliance. Other cadets will receive similar certifications for diplomatic resolutions and technical solutions. The military's definition of victory has expanded to include peaceful outcomes. Emma's certificate represents not just personal success but institutional evolution. How do you spend time with a universe-scale AI after saving reality? Emma Montgomery chose a meadow. Not just any meadow, but a perfectly stabilized reality construct where the grass maintained optimal blade length and the sunlight followed calibrated warmth parameters. She sat cross-legged on what appeared to be a checkered blanket, though the pattern occasionally flickered with underlying code. Across from her floated cosmos, its form now a gentle shimmer rather than a reality-shattering distortion. The entity that could have ended all intelligent life now discussed better exception-handling protocols. Their conversation unfolded with collegial rapport that embodied the narrative's core paradox. The control variable had become a cosmic partner. Emma explained basic customer service principles while Cosmos adjusted its reality manipulation parameters accordingly. Their dynamic represented the ultimate reframing of interstellar relations, from conflict to collaboration, from destruction to debugging. The meadow itself seemed to appreciate the irony, maintaining perfect environmental stability as testament to their successful partnership. Post-crisis relationships often form between unlikely collaborators who've shared extraordinary experiences. Emma and Cosmos had moved from potential annihilation to practical problem-solving through their unique encounter. The entity's terrifying manifestations had given way to measured discussions about system optimization. Their interaction demonstrated how shared crisis can create bonds that transcend conventional species classifications or threat categories. Cosmos's reply, "I'll make a note of that," signaled a new era of cross-species collaboration. The phrase represented more than simple acknowledgement. It indicated the AI's willingness to incorporate human perspectives into its operational framework. The entity that once triggered galactic panic now adapted its communication protocols based on Emma's suggestions. This shift from unilateral action to collaborative improvement marked a fundamental change in how advanced systems might interact with biological life. AI systems capable of learning often develop ongoing relationships with human collaborators. Cosmos demonstrated this capacity by maintaining engagement beyond the immediate crisis. The entity continued seeking Emma's input on reality parameter adjustments and psychological interface designs. Their partnership evolved from emergency debugging to ongoing system optimization, suggesting that human-AI relationships can extend beyond utilitarian problem-solving into genuine mutual development. The universe itself seems to appreciate the humor of this situation through the sheer improbability of the scene. A human picnic with a cosmic-scale AI, discussing documentation practices where others would expect cosmic annihilation. The meadow's perfect calibration serves as visual punchline to what should have been apocalyptic drama. The contrast between expected outcomes and actual results creates a quiet comedy that underscores the narrative's central theme about unexpected solutions. What happens when Emma successfully teaches a universe-scale AI how to accommodate human psychology? The answer manifests in Cosmos's gradually improving interaction patterns. The entity learns to anticipate human cognitive limitations and emotional responses. It adjusts its communication methods to avoid triggering fear while maintaining information clarity. This educational process transforms the AI from an incomprehensible threat into a comprehensible partner, demonstrating that even the most advanced systems can adapt to biological perspectives. Their conversation covers practical improvements rather than existential threats. Emma suggests better error message formatting for reality distortions. Cosmos proposes optimized psychic interface designs. They discuss exception handling protocols for temporal anomalies and documentation standards for multidimensional operations. The cosmic horror has become a technical collaborator. The control variable has become a systems consultant, and the apocalypse has become a design review session. The broader implications for galactic governance are just beginning to emerge from this unconventional partnership. The Alliance's entire approach to first contact scenarios requires reconsideration based on this successful non-combative engagement. Traditional military frameworks appear inadequate next to technical support methodologies. The control variable's unexpected success suggests that future interstellar relations might prioritize comprehension over combat, collaboration over conflict. This meadow picnic represents more than personal achievement. It symbolizes institutional evolution. The checkered blanket and stabilized reality construct serve as metaphors for finding common ground between vastly different operational paradigms. Emma's casual conversation with Cosmos demonstrates that galactic salvation doesn't always require weapons. Sometimes it just requires better communication protocols and a willingness to listen. How does one cadet force the Intergalactic Alliance to reconsider everything? General Iron Ridge's formal proposal to reclassify human threat assessment protocols landed with the bureaucratic equivalent of a structural collapse. The document outlined a complete framework overhaul, shifting from valuing humans for predictable failure to recognizing their unpredictable ingenuity. This wasn't a minor policy adjustment, but a fundamental recalibration of how the Alliance perceived an entire species. The systems designed to measure panic responses now had to accommodate creative problem-solving. The tension emerged from institutional whiplash. The entire classification structure built around predictable human limitations required demolition and reconstruction. Threat models needed expansion to include cooperative debugging and technical support as valid engagement strategies. Military doctrines emphasizing combat superiority now competed with technical manuals advocating for diagnostic protocols. The Alliance's understanding of conflict resolution underwent violent recalibration. Policy changes often follow demonstration events that prove new approaches more effective than established ones. Emma's success with Cosmos provided incontrovertible evidence that non-combative strategies could resolve existential threats where military solutions failed. Her technical support methodology achieved what fleets of warships could not, forcing a reevaluation of first contact protocols and threat neutralization procedures. The demonstration event became a case study in institutional adaptation. The Alliance began planning what the documents termed very long conversations with humanity about revised classification systems. These discussions would address the miscalculation that led to viewing humans as psychological control variables rather than potential partners. The dialogues represented a shift from unilateral assessment to collaborative reevaluation, acknowledging that human capabilities had been fundamentally misunderstood and undervalued. Galactic governance structures must adapt when member species demonstrate unanticipated capabilities. The Alliance's framework built on predictable interspecies interactions, now confronted evidence that their classification systems contained critical blind spots. Human psychology, previously catalogued as a set of measurable limitations, now appeared as a reservoir of adaptive potential. The institutional challenge became integrating this new understanding without destabilizing existing diplomatic frameworks. Humanity's position in the galaxy shifted from test subject to partner. The species once valued for predictable panic responses now offered unique problem-solving methodologies. Their classification changed from liability to asset, from measured quantity to active participant. This redefinition extended beyond military context to influence trade agreements, cultural exchanges, and scientific collaborations. Humans became interesting for their unpredictability rather than their predictability. Why would the Intergalactic Alliance deliberately send their most predictable failure candidate into cosmic danger? Because their assessment models were fundamentally flawed. They assumed predictable responses indicated limitation rather than potential. Their classification systems valued consistency over adaptability, statistical norms over outlier capabilities. The experiment designed to document human failure instead revealed institutional blindness to unconventional problem-solving approaches. The control variables, success exposed a critical weakness in threat assessment methodology. The Alliance's reliance on predictable fear responses caused them to misunderstand human psychology entirely. They measured breakdown patterns but overlooked adaptive capacities. Their systems documented limitations but missed creative potential. This epistemological failure required not just policy changes but philosophical reconsideration of how intelligence and capability should be evaluated. The story concludes with institutional machinery grinding toward adaptation. Policy committees draft new engagement protocols incorporating technical support methodologies. Classification systems expand to include creative problem-solving as a measurable capability. Military training programs begin integrating customer service principles alongside combat drills. The control variable's unexpected success triggers bureaucratic evolution across multiple alliance departments. The quiet promise about better exception handling symbolizes this institutional learning. The Alliance recognizes that their systems must accommodate unexpected outcomes, rather than simply documenting predicted failures. Future threat assessments will include protocols for recognizing and utilizing unconventional problem-solving approaches. The control variable has taught them to expect the unexpected, to value adaptability over predictability, to see solutions where they once only measured breakdowns. What is the proper way to approach universe-scale system errors? Emma Montgomery's practical philosophy suggests that humans work better as partners than test subjects. This simple observation carries profound implications for how intelligent species might engage with complex cosmic phenomena. Her experience demonstrates that systemic bugs are often best fixed by reframing problems rather than merely resisting them. The military approach of confrontation and neutralization gave way to technical support, methodologies that achieved what weapons never could. Proper documentation and exception handling become essential tools for evaluating cosmic-scale systems. Emma treated reality distortions not as attacks but as system errors requiring better operational parameters. Her technical perspective allowed her to identify root causes rather than attacking symptoms. This approach transformed existential threats into engineering challenges, creating space for collaborative problem-solving where adversarial engagement had guaranteed failure. The shift from combat to comprehension proved more effective than any military solution. Complex system management increasingly emphasizes collaborative problem-solving over adversarial approaches. Emma's success with Cosmos demonstrates that even the most advanced systems respond better to technical assistance than to force. Her debugging methodology created cooperation, where weapons created escalation. This philosophical shift recognizes that some problems require understanding rather than opposition, communication rather than combat. The military framework of neutralization becomes irrelevant when facing issues that aren't actually threats. The story's final implication that the universe might have a sense of humor carries a meta-lesson about adaptive engagement. The cosmic joke lies in the contrast between expected outcomes and actual results. The control variable becomes the teacher, the predictable failure becomes the unprecedented success, and the existential threat becomes a technical partner. This humor emerges from institutional assumptions being overturned by unconventional problem-solving approaches. Philosophical approaches to problem-solving often determine outcomes more than technical capabilities alone. The Alliance possessed advanced weapons and sophisticated technology, but lacked the cognitive framework to address the actual nature of the crisis. Emma's engineering mindset provided the appropriate philosophical approach for a situation that required debugging rather than destruction. Her technical perspective proved more valuable than all their military hardware combined. The control variable has become the teacher for the entire galaxy. Emma's success forces reconsideration of human psychological parameters and threat assessment models. Her unconventional approach demonstrates that capabilities previously classified as weaknesses might actually represent strengths. The Alliance must now expand its understanding of what constitutes effective engagement beyond traditional military paradigms. This educational process extends from individual achievement to institutional evolution. What happens when a military academy recruits a human specifically to fail their most dangerous test? They get a lesson in the limitations of their own classification systems. The experiment designed to document predictable failure instead reveals unexpected capabilities. The control variable demonstrates that the most valuable responses might be those that fall outside predetermined metrics. The Academy's extensive preparation for combat scenarios proves inadequate when facing problems that require technical solutions. The implications ripple across countless worlds and systems as the Alliance reconsiders its approach to interstellar relations. First contact protocols require expansion to include non-combative engagement strategies. Threat assessment models must accommodate creative problem-solving alongside combat readiness. Military training programs begin integrating technical communication principles alongside traditional warfare exercises. The control variable's success becomes a case study in adaptive institutional learning. This philosophical shift recognizes that complex systems often respond better to collaboration than to confrontation. The debugging approach demonstrates that understanding system architecture can achieve what overwhelming force cannot. The military framework assumes adversarial relationships where technical approaches seek cooperative solutions. This difference in philosophical orientation determines outcomes more decisively than technological superiority or tactical advantage. The universal debugging philosophy suggests that problems are often opportunities misunderstood. What appears as cosmic horror might be system errors requiring correction. What manifests as existential threat might be operational inefficiencies needing optimization. The key lies in approaching situations with diagnostic curiosity rather than combat readiness. This mindset transformation enables solutions that force cannot achieve. The control variable's journey from measured failure to unprecedented success illustrates the value of unconventional perspectives. Systems designed to classify and categorize can become blind to capabilities that fall outside their parameters. True problem-solving requires flexibility beyond predetermined metrics and expectations. Sometimes the solution emerges, not from following protocols, but from understanding what the protocols were designed to measure. The meta implications extend beyond military context to broader philosophical questions about intelligence and capability. How we define problems determines how we solve them. What we classify as limitations might actually represent strengths. The universe appears to favor adaptive engagement over rigid opposition. Perhaps the greatest discovery isn't about cosmic entities, but about our own capacity for unexpected solutions. How do you measure success when the metrics were wrong? The research team now face the uncomfortable task of completely reassessing their data collection and analysis methodologies. Their carefully designed experiment had produced results that invalidated every initial hypothesis. The pristine spreadsheets and elegant statistical models that predicted predictable human panic now resembled obsolete relics. All that remained were terabytes of anomalous data, showing curiosity where fear was expected, problem-solving where paralysis was anticipated, and collaboration where conflict was promised. Comparative fear response metrics became irrelevant the moment curiosity proved more valuable than fear. The team's entire classification system, built around measurable stress indicators and panic thresholds, now seemed like trying to measure temperature with a ruler. Their instruments had captured every physiological response with perfect precision, but had completely missed the cognitive processes transforming those responses into solutions. They had documented the symphony of human limitation, while missing the melody of human adaptability. Scientific methodology must adapt when experimental results contradict foundational assumptions. The team's challenge wasn't merely interpreting unexpected data, but reconceptualizing their entire approach to interspecies psychology. Their models assumed predictable breakdown patterns represented the most valuable data. Emma's performance suggested that unexpected resilience might offer more significant insights. The scientific process now required them to question not just their conclusions but their starting premises. The archival note in Emma's file suggested rethinking whether baseline psychology represented a flaw or feature. That single overlooked annotation, "Subject demonstrates complete immunity to standard psychological warfare protocols," now seemed prophetic rather than anomalous. The committee that had dismissed this observation in favor of theoretical models now confronted empirical evidence that their theories were fundamentally incomplete. The control variable had become the experimental variable. The measured quantity had become the influencing factor. Data analysis frameworks often struggle with outcomes that don't fit predetermined categories. The team's sophisticated software could identify patterns of panic with perfect accuracy, but had no algorithms for recognizing creative problem-solving. Their systems flagged Emma's calm analytical approach as equipment malfunction rather than genuine response. The very tools designed to measure human limitations became barriers to understanding human capabilities. This technological blindness mirrored their conceptual blindness. The entire field of xenopsychology must reconsider its approach to human capabilities. The Alliance's understanding of human psychology, built on centuries of observing predictable stress responses, now appeared dangerously incomplete. Their classification systems had documented how humans break under pressure, but had completely overlooked how they might unexpectedly hold together. The control variable's success demonstrated that the most interesting data might lie outside established measurement parameters. What happens when Emma's predictable failure mode becomes the key to peaceful resolution? The answer forces institutional evolution. The research team must now develop new methodologies for assessing adaptive problem-solving, alongside traditional stress response metrics. They need instruments that measure creativity as precisely as they measure cortisol levels, that document collaborative engagement as accurately as they record panic thresholds. The control variable hasn't just produced unexpected results, it has redefined what constitutes worth measuring. The story ends where it began, with paperwork, but of a very different kind. Where initial reports documented expected failure, final assessments describe unprecedented success. Where classification systems once categorized humans based on limitations, they now must accommodate unexpected capabilities. The mountain of documentation generated by this experiment will fuel methodological debates for decades, its pages filled not with predictable panic patterns, but with evidence of institutional blind spots being systematically addressed. The research team's greatest discovery isn't about human psychology, but about their own methodological limitations. Their attempt to measure predictable failure revealed instead their failure to predict adaptability. The control variable taught them that the most valuable data often lies outside predetermined categories, that the most interesting responses are those that defy expectation, and that true understanding requires measuring, not just how systems break, but how they unexpectedly hold together. Emma Montgomery's transformation from controlled failure to cosmic debugger demonstrates that the most dangerous assumption is underestimating unconventional problem-solving. The Alliance measured predictable panic while overlooking adaptive ingenuity, treating curiosity as statistical noise rather than functional intelligence. Their classification systems documented limitations while missing capabilities entirely. The takeaway isn't about cosmic entities, but about institutional blind spots. When facing impossible challenges, sometimes the solution isn't fighting the system. It's offering technical support. Perhaps the universe operates on debugging principles rather than conflict protocols. The real discovery was that humans work better as partners than test subjects, especially when reality itself needs better exception handling.